Nestled in the depths of the Lincolnshire countryside, between a melting pot of habitats that consists of the Lincolnshire Fens, the Lincolnshire Wolds, and a stone's throw from the east coast of England, is a fantastic little plot of land. And this plot of land belongs to a beautiful Georgian manor house, which is believed to be about 200 to 250 years old. And there is a really unique opportunity here for me to create something rather special. Since moving into the property in April 2025, it has been my ambition to turn this 1 acre plot into something truly unique for wildlife. And stick around, because at the end of this video, I'm going to give you a full list of birds and butterflies that I have seen and heard from within this garden over the last 8 months. So what was I going to do and how was I going to do it? Well, and in this video, I'm going to explain to you everything that I have done to the garden in the last 8 months and what my ambitions are moving forward over the coming months and indeed years, where I hope to turn this plot into an absolute sanctuary for nature. So where did it all begin? How did I start to create this mini oasis for wildlife? Well, I simply sat back and watched. I wanted to observe what bird life was already here, what plants were in the existing lawn, which is pretty much all the garden was, a mown lawn and some beautiful mature trees. So I wanted to just take it all in for a while and see what came up, so that I didn't dig up any potential good habitats for wildlife. And the results were truly amazing. By simply letting the grass grow and mowing a path through what would be in time the main meadow area, I was then able to just watch what came into the garden and what bloomed. And the results were quite incredible. From the edge of the garden, the boundaries, I was able to observe some of the surrounding fields and the bird life that came within those. And some of those birds included up to 4 curlews, which I was absolutely thrilled to see, that spent a couple of weeks here in the first 2 weeks of April on their way migrating north to some of their breeding grounds. We also witnessed a kestrel on regular occasions coming through the garden and landing in 1 or 2 of the ash trees on the boundaries. And I've also heard lots of owl species as well. We've had barn owl, tawny owl and little owl all calling within the first few days of arriving at the property, which was very encouraging indeed. We even had a pair of pheasants decide to take up residence in the garden and decided to have a few play fights with each other to try and figure out who was king of this territory, and it was quite amusing watching them strutting around across the lawn. I then started looking closely at the ground and noticed a lot of basal rosettes of things like ground ivy, red and white dead nettle, dandelions and forget-me-nots, which all started to grow in these longer grassy areas that I was now leaving, and indeed begin to flower for the first time in who knows how long, because this predominantly was just a mown lawn in the many years prior to me moving here. Then one day I noticed a robin that was hanging around my truck on the driveway, and it was actually going in and out of my bumper with some leaves and twigs. So that of course meant that my truck was out of action for a few weeks, because it had indeed started to build a nest, which I was truly thrilled with. And then one day when walking around the mown path in the main meadow area, I noticed an absolutely motionless little rabbit that was just trying its very best to not be noticed and squatting right down in the grass, which was a real joy to see. And they are in the fields around the edge of this property, and indeed there is a bit of a rabbit burrow that goes under the ash tree that's on the boundary. So that was another wonderful little insight as to what was already here on this land. And as spring progressed, I started to see more plants popping up here, there and everywhere. Plants like grape hyacinth, which are really good for bees, and cow parsley as well, a really shade tolerant, beautiful species that is really good for a lot of hoverflies in particular, and smaller flies and insects. The kestrel as well was still hanging around. It was still coming in and out of the garden on a regular basis and using some of the longer grassy areas both inside and outside the garden to hunt for its prey species, which would be predominantly voles and mice. One morning I was particularly thrilled to see a song thrush on one of the mown lawn areas, collecting worms and invertebrates. Now, this bird is a red listed species here in the UK, one that has declined massively over the last 30 years due to the use of slug pellets and indeed intensification of agricultural practices. And it's really great to see this bird hunting in a protected habitat that it could now call its home here in the Georgian Wildlife Garden. And just beyond the boundary, I was really pleased as well to see up to 4 hares bounding across the field and really looking like they were just loving life and feeding on some of the smaller stems of some of the sugar beet and the grasses around the edges of the field in which we were watching them. Also, around the margins of this field where the grasses are left to grow long, I was very thrilled to finally spot one of the barn owls that I'd heard calling on several occasions prior to seeing it for the first time. And what a magnificent sight they are, to see them just ghostly meandering across the landscape and the several fields around this property where they are resident and where there are plenty of barns for them to nest in. Then as temperatures warmed and we got above single figures here in April, I started to see a few more butterflies coming out, things like the holly blue butterflies, which were really fantastic to see and in great numbers around the wealth of holly trees that there are within this garden, no doubt due to the well-drained sandy soils that are found underneath the turf here. And then as we progressed further into April, I started to see the signs of new leaves, new shoots coming out of the lifeless looking branches of the big beech trees just outside the back door, which were very quickly devoured by lots and lots of wood pigeons, which was actually really nice to see them eating these fresh shoots and making the most of this valuable food source at this time of year. And of course, as we extended into April even further, there started to become more leaves coming out on some of the trees, the silver birch trees and many others, which again is then providing more habitat for more wildlife. Then on a relatively warm day in April, I spotted my absolute favourite bee, and this was a tiny little gingery orange bee that is known as the tawny mining bee, which was located on one of the walls of the house, just warming itself up in the sunshine. And it was a real treat to see this species, so I therefore made it my mission to try and find out if there were any more within the garden. And as we approached the end of April, the robin was now sitting on eggs, the robin that had taken up residence within the bumper of my truck now was sat on eggs. So I was really keen to make sure this wasn't disturbed by any birds or cats, and hopefully would have some young very soon. And also, whilst I was doing that, I noticed a wren going in and out one of the smaller conifer trees, and to my surprise there was an absolutely perfect little dome of a nest nestled within the centre of the small conifer tree in the front garden, and inside were a few little beautiful eggs that the wren had laid, and I was very pleased to see them lay 1 egg a day on this nest. It was absolutely fantastic to witness. I also started to see stock doves coming in to the slightly longer grassy areas to feed on any seeds they could find. I was putting some food down for them, so it was a real joy to see this predominantly farmland bird coming into the garden to feed. And they then went on to have a nest in one of the spruce trees in the front garden and produce an egg, which then fledged into a fully grown stock dove. And I was so pleased to see them actually breeding within the confines of this garden. Going back to the birds of prey, we would regularly see buzzards as well, circling high above the garden on the late morning thermals, and also occasionally swooping through the garden from 1 or 2 of the large trees where they like to perch. With the lengthening daylight hours, it was truly great to see the barn owls continuing to hunt over the fields behind the house, quartering silently along the verges, hunting for a meal and some prey items, no doubt for their young, which will have been nearby. And they could even be heard calling to each other long into the evening, doing that typical screech call that they make to each other to stay in contact. Then on the 26th of April, I saw my first orange-tipped butterfly, my favourite butterfly here in the UK and a true harbinger of spring. And it was a little bit late. I usually see them in the first week or two of April, but to see one flying through the garden really made my heart sing and made me think, right, I have to do everything I can to boost the population of these beautiful little insects in the coming years. So with this increase in longer grassy areas and a slow increase in the insect population, this meant it was a great hunting ground for bats, of which there are pipistrelle species around here. I've not got a bat detector out to check what other species there are, but it was truly brilliant to see them hunting in the garden at night, catching many insects. Then one day on a walk through the main meadow area, I spotted a plant I'd not seen in a garden before. A beautiful bright yellow little plant that wasn't a buttercup because it was too early. It was in fact greater celandine, which appeared in the middle of the meadow, and also I noticed along the roadside verge outside the property as well, which was truly beautiful to see, and one that I will look to encourage throughout the rest of the garden, along with the dandelions and the daisies that were also then left to flower in profusion along the roadside outside the house. I also noticed the first garlic mustard flowering, which is of course the larval food plant for the orange-tipped butterfly I'd just seen. So a great indication that this garden is a good habitat for them, the soils are right, and it is a plant that I can look to increase in numbers over the coming years for the orange-tipped butterflies and the wealth of other insects that use this very special larval food plant. What was also really nice was to see greenfinches regularly calling from the tops of the cypress tree in which they did then nest, which was brilliant to see. Greenfinches were hit really heavily about 2 decades ago by a disease that really massively reduced their numbers, but they are slowly coming back along with the chaffinch, of which there are plenty of in this garden as well, and they went on to breed in some of the fir trees also. Blackbirds also started coming in the garden in good numbers and flicking over leaves and bits of grass to search for insects and worms. And along with the blackbirds came the song thrushes, who were now back feeding their few young chicks that had just fledged and were most of the time underneath one of the conifer hedges, hiding away from any potential predators such as cats. And it was really brilliant to see the increased activity of the song thrushes in the garden, hunting for worms and other insects in the longer grassy areas. In an effort to try and keep the dogs in the garden, I put up a new fence along the edge of the driveway, and in doing so discovered the original driveway for the house and also a myriad of broken pieces of pottery, which was just wonderful to see, some of which I'm still yet to identify and age properly. Underneath the main row of beech trees that we believe is an ancient hedgerow, there started to emerge an absolute sea of bluebells, which was a pure delight to see. And in amongst them, there were many other species as well, things like primroses and indeed some cuckoo pint, which is a very beautiful and underrated plant in my eyes and has this real scent of rotting flesh where it attracts insects such as flies in to pollinate it. Along with the bluebells, there were other shrubs starting to flower as well, such as the red currant and also the lilacs that were on the front of the drive, some beautifully coloured lilacs that were then starting to attract a variety of bees and butterflies, including the small white butterfly, brimstone butterfly and the red admiral butterfly. And then underneath the lilacs there became a small sea of wood spurge starting to emerge, which is this beautiful euphorbia that comes out in these very shaded areas, does very well in deep shade, and that started attracting a lot of smaller insects, as well as the cow parsley that was now beginning to flower in profusion. And whilst tying back some of the existing honeysuckle to the newly installed fence along the driveway, and looking at some of the beautiful flowers that this honeysuckle was now producing, I came across a rather interesting little caterpillar that turned out to be the caterpillar of a copper underwing moth. Not a caterpillar that I've ever seen before, but it was using this honeysuckle as a larval food plant. Then one day, behind the house in one of the grass fields, I heard the call of a bird that I have not heard for a long time. It is a very scarce bird here in the UK now, and one that has again declined massively and is indeed red listed, and that was the call of a grey partridge, which I saw scuttling off through the grass before it flew off, and my heart just leapt almost into my mouth. I was so amazed to see this bird living so close to the house. It was an absolute joy to see, and really started me thinking about how I could try and help this very scarce fenland bird. And as with no doubt many of you watching this video, you will understand the sheer joy when you see your first swallow of the year. And for me, it was around about the middle of April when I saw it, and then they started arriving in great numbers. And with there being lots of pasture around the house, lots of fields of cows, and therefore dung and insects for them to feed on, plus open barns, there is a good number of swallows here, to the point where I started to see them coming over and into our own garden, feeding over the longer grassy areas in the meadow, which was absolutely delightful to see. Just after the swallows, of course, the swifts arrived along with the house martins. Again, my favourite bird, the house martin, but a sheer joy to see. And the swifts, although there were only 2 of 3, they were quite high above, circling over the house and the village, and no doubt collecting many of the insects that are associated with these longer grassy areas within the garden and in the adjacent fields. Near the front of the property is an old barn, and around the side of that barn is kind of an overgrown area, and it's predominantly nettles, and I just left it to see what would happen. And in the process of doing so, I saw lots and lots of money spiders, and also some of the comma butterflies as well that were coming to lay their eggs on this nettle patch. In some of the longer grassy areas around the edges of the garden, and indeed some of the mown areas, I started noticing 1 or 2 ladybirds, and that turned into hundreds and hundreds of individuals. So many, in fact, that I stopped counting when I got to 500 individuals within 50 or 60 square metres of the garden. And these were also joined by lots and lots of chrysalises and larvae that were spread all through the longer grassy areas around the edges of the garden. After the arrival of the house martins, I also decided to put up a house martin box because I was determined to get them nesting on the house after I'd seen one or two inspecting around the gutter on the other side of the property. So I was really keen to try and attract them to the house by putting up a couple of artificial boxes or artificial nest cups initially. As we progressed into May, the longer grasses then started to go to seed and plants started to emerge in the wildflower meadow, such as the buttercups, which really add this beautiful splash of yellow to any grassy patch. With all this increased insect life, it started to attract some of the warbler species of birds as well. For example, we had a male whitethroat who was resident in the garden for many weeks throughout May and into June while it was breeding, and he was singing his lungs out most days, either from the top of the cypress tree or the elder tree at the bottom of the garden, along with a myriad of other warblers as well, such as blackcap, which we think bred in the northern part of the garden in a denser scrubby area. We had a garden warbler for 2 or 3 days singing in the garden. Willow warblers and chiffchaffs were also regular visitors throughout the course of May. Then one day, as I was just going out the back door, I noticed a really small insect that looked very brightly coloured. And on closer inspection, it was indeed my first ever ruby-tailed wasp, and what an insect that is. It was absolutely loving all the little crevices on the wall of the house in which it would not sit still, which made trying to film an absolute nightmare, but I was truly delighted to see this insect inside the garden. Then as we got further into May, I started seeing more flowers flowering. Things such as the hedge woundwort, which is an absolute bee magnet, and this was flowering just into the verge outside the front of the property, as well as a few individuals underneath the beech tree, of which I have now collected the seed and will be spreading further throughout the garden to encourage this brilliant bee magnet. Then as we stepped into June, we had the first proper rain in several months, and it was a really welcome sight. The grass was beginning to look quite tired, and it was really lovely to see everything having a good drench, which will of course meant lots more foliage, lots more nectar for a lot of our insect species. And it was about this time that the wrens were just about to fledge. One little last check and they were hunkered down in their nest, ready to go. So I left them in peace, and I'm very pleased to say the wrens fledged along with the robins. Then as we got through June, we started to notice more butterflies emerging and getting towards the peak of the year for butterfly species. Things such as the red admirals would regularly bask on the south and west facing walls on the house to try and warm up in the morning and the afternoon sun. I also then noted another species for the garden, which was in fact the large skipper, which would often perch on top of the nettles. This was a male that was guarding his territory, and the females were no doubt using the longer grassy areas in the meadow and around the margins of the garden to lay their eggs. And these longer grassy areas also made the perfect habitat for the meadow brown butterfly, the very aptly named brown butterfly that we get here in the UK. One of our more common summer species, but one that was very, very welcome. And I saw 5 or 6 of these individuals at one time flying within the main wildflower meadow through the course of June and into July. And along with the meadow brown came a species that I was really hoping I'd see, one that I haven't seen a lot of in recent years because of our drier springs and drier summers, and that was the ringlet butterfly, a truly enigmatic little species, one that is closely associated with damper, grassy, semi-shady woodland edges, and one that I saw here in 1s or 2s, so not massive numbers, but the fact that they were here means that I have a population to work with, and I can encourage more of the grass species that they use to lay their eggs on. Then one day, whilst Watching these meadow browns and ringlets, I noticed a very different damselfly that landed on the edge of one of the shrubs, and it was indeed a willow emerald damselfly, a species that has only recently colonised the UK in about 2009, I believe, and has slowly been spreading north. And I cannot believe how excited I was to see this individual on the edge of the meadow hunting and using it as a home. So I'm very keen to try and encourage them to breed within the garden. And at this time of year now, we started to see more of the wildflowers appear, one that might not be commonly classed as a wildflower, but one that is a really good nectar source, and that is the spear thistle. I also at this point planted some cabbage and some broccoli in some pots for the white butterflies, the large white, the small white and the green vein white, and it wasn't long before they were visiting. In fact, the same and the next day they were visited by these butterflies and eggs started to be laid on these plants. Also within the wildflower meadow there was one or two ragwort which appeared, which turned into an absolute insect magnet, from large and small white butterflies to a myriad of soldier beetles and many other species, including gatekeeper and small copper butterflies, which then use this brilliant plant for wildlife. And whilst observing all this insect activity within the main meadow area, I couldn't help but notice another smallish bird in the field behind the meadow, and it was indeed another grey partridge. So no doubt they have been nesting and breeding locally, and this one ran straight past me. It's one of the best views I've ever had of a grey partridge, and it really did remind me that I need to be doing everything I can to try and help and encourage this species in the local environment. I also stumbled upon one of the most iconic and impressive caterpillars that you can find in the UK, and it was a rather large elephant hawkmoth caterpillar that was marching its way across the gravel, that had been feeding on some of the minuscule willow herb specimens that had just naturally popped up in the gravel that I'd let to grow for this very reason, not expecting to find one of these incredible caterpillars marching across the gravel one day, which was a true delight to see. In some of the shady areas under the trees near the euphorbia, some of the white butterflies, the small and the large white, started laying eggs as well on the garlic mustard. And the nettles that I'd left in the main meadow area also attracted red admirals, of which there were several eggs laid that turned into caterpillars that I then discovered a few weeks later, which again was a really good sign that there are good numbers of these insects in the area. The spear thistle was still providing lots and lots of nectar throughout July. It has a very long flowering period and was really attractive for so many bees and butterflies. And all the while the large and small white caterpillars continued to grow on the cabbages and absolutely destroy and decimate all the plants that I had planted. In part of the main mown area that I hadn't mown for several weeks, it was pretty much undisturbed grassland. I then noticed one day on my travels a queen red-tailed bumblebee digging this little hole that she was going to use as her nest right in the middle of the lawn. So I marked it with a stake so that I didn't disturb it or go anywhere near it. And this queen bumblebee was truly wonderful to watch. The way she was digging this burrow, it fascinated me for many minutes. And as with any longer grassy areas, red ants started to make their home within the main meadow area, which was really good to see. So then very carefully and gingerly I managed to create and erect a new fence to keep the dogs out of what will be the main nature reserve area, so the wildlife pond and the wildflower meadow areas. So the dogs have still got room to run around, but there is also an area that is completely untouched bar a mown path throughout the course of next year. Whilst doing that, I also made a little bit of a pergola against the house, of which I have now planted a couple of roses that we want to train up over the archway to again provide more habitat, more cover and more nectar for bees. And now entering July, the swallow numbers continued to increase, with them having their second broods now fledging, and at times there were 30 to 40 individuals flying in and around the garden, skimming over the meadow areas for insects, which again was an absolute delight to witness. The large white caterpillars in the woodland continued to grow, and I started to see them everywhere, even on tiny plants located in some of the cracks in the paving around the house. So I had to relocate many of these individuals so they didn't run out of food. I also found more red admiral caterpillars on the nettles in the meadow, which was again very encouraging. And in this peak of the insect season in July, there were also more dragonfly species seen in the garden. So I saw my first common darters, southern hawkers, that were all hawking over the longer grassy meadow areas, catching insects and going back to a prominent perch to eat them. As well as more views of the willow emerald damselfly, which again was very encouraging and really spurs me on to want to create a wildlife pond and correct habitat for them to establish themselves properly within the garden. In addition to the new fencing, I decided to add some herbaceous borders because there simply wasn't enough colour and nectar in the garden in terms of non-native species. There wasn't even a flower bed. So I dug out a load of turf, turned the soil over and imported some other soil where the soil was very shallow, that was on top of the old driveway that used to come to the front of this house 100 years ago, and was able to then plant lots and lots of very beneficial herbaceous perennials that will hopefully get better and better over the next year to provide more nectar for a lot more insects. And me being me, within these herbaceous borders I planted a few cabbages as well, just to provide more larval food plants for some of the butterflies, the small whites and the large whites in particular, of which they almost immediately started laying more eggs. Then on one very hot July evening, I had the back doors open, and then the privilege of having a poplar hawk moth fly into the house, and seeing this insect up close was a sheer delight. I also saw a few small copper butterflies in and around the meadow areas that I've already mentioned, nectaring on the ragwort and also laying some eggs on one or two of the dock plants that I left within the meadow area itself. And on a walk one afternoon, less than a mile from the house down one of the fenland roads, I spotted a butterfly that I've never seen in the UK, and that was a clouded yellow butterfly. And they are becoming more frequent in terms of their sightings here in the UK. So I really want to try and encourage them, and I'm going to be planting lots of specific plants within the main meadow area to try and encourage them and hopefully add them as another tick to the garden list. The young buzzards had now fledged and were flying through the garden from spruce tree to spruce tree and making a lot of racket throughout the course of the day. Then as we went into September, we started getting a few more passage migrants coming back into the garden. Things like chiffchaffs and willow warblers were often seen in the spruce trees, pecking through the pine needles for invertebrates. And it was at this point that I started removing the turf in the front garden so that I could create a brand new wildflower meadow and of course a new wildlife pond. By now as well, the holly tree was absolutely laden with berries, which is of course perfectly timed for when the migratory birds are going to start coming back into this country into the autumn months, species such as our fieldfares and redwings. And it might be September, but a few later emerging butterfly species started to appear. So we had many red admirals and one or two speckled wood butterflies that were now on their third brood and were using the dappled shade around the margins of the meadow area. Then on the 22nd of September, I heard the call of a bird that I longed to hear every year, and I was so glad to hear it. And it was, of course, the arrival of the first skein of pink-footed geese flying directly over the house. And the autumn crocus that I'd almost forgotten about planting started to flower under the dappled shade of one of the sycamore trees, again on the edge of the wildflower meadow area. The ivy by this point as well was starting to flower, and there were just an increase of holly berries everywhere, which was the perfect setup for when our migratory birds from Scandinavia arrive. And as we headed deeper into autumn, I started noticing lots more fungi in the lawn that I'd not cut, which was a really good indicator of healthy soils and lots of these fruiting bodies popping up in this longer grassy area. I also started to see more and more skeins of the pink-footed geese, which never get boring, and I was really pleased to see them in some of the fields surrounding the house, feeding on some of the sugar beet tops that had been left by the combines that had knocked the tops off, and these were scattered all through the fields, providing a great food source for these pink-footed geese that had travelled thousands of miles from Iceland to come and feed here over winter. And with the onset of autumn, one of the best trees you can have in a garden are the beech trees. These just go from a beautiful green into these yellows and oranges and then these russet brown colours. And the main row of beech trees near the house started to turn into this beautiful array of colours, along with the beech hedge which goes around two sides of the boundary. I'm sure you won't mind seeing more skeins of the pink-footed geese. And then on the 28th of November, I saw my best flyover yet, which was absolutely brilliant, and it just took my breath away. It went on for about 3 minutes, and there was just wave after wave of these geese coming over the house. At this time of year, the birch leaves started to look really nice as well, and went this beautiful bright yellow colour before dropping. Then one afternoon on the way home from work, I stopped in the road to film a barn owl flying along the dike past the truck, which was one of the closest encounters I've had of this bird this year, and it was a sheer delight to see them still present, still feeding within the fields surrounding the house. And as I promised at the beginning of this video, a list of the birds that I'd heard or seen in or around the garden. And as for the list of butterflies seen so far, it consists of red admiral, small tortoiseshell, green veined white, brimstone, peacock, speckled wood, holly blue, small white, large white, painted lady, meadow brown, large skipper, ringlet, comma, small copper and gatekeeper, taking the total to 16 species. And by this point it was of course pretty much Christmas, so I thought I'd just put in a shot of the house with the Christmas lights on over the festive period. And one thing I've thoroughly enjoyed over the last couple of weeks with these big open fenland skies and the period of high pressure that we've been having, meaning it's been quite cold but very clear, has made for some amazing sunsets that I've been able to watch the sun dropping down into the distance, that some of you may have seen some of the previous shorts I've done of the sunsets here in the Lincolnshire Fens. And while I've been on a bit of a break over Christmas, I've not wasted any time. I've been separating some of the honesty seed that I collected earlier on in the year, which I am then going to sow in the spring around some of the borders, around some of the shady areas, so that hopefully that can take a foothold within the garden because it's such a brilliant plant. I've also been planting a lot of bulbs up until Christmas, lots and lots of species, things like wild garlic, bluebells, wood anemones, all of which I'll be bringing you in a full video soon. So what are my plans next for the garden? What's coming up? What am I going to be creating over the coming months in 2026? Well, firstly, I need to get some more bird boxes up. As with the above mentioned birds, I want to be putting up boxes for the kestrel, the tawny owl, the little owl, barn owl, blue tits, robins, starlings, house sparrows, lots and lots of species. So I will be bringing you a full video of some of the boxes that I'll be putting up in and around the garden. I'll also be doing a lot of tree and shrub planting. I've got many trees and shrubs ready to go in the ground as soon as it thaws out a little bit. It's rather frozen here at the moment, so I'm just waiting for the ground to warm up a little bit. I'm also going to be doing some more bulb planting as we go into the spring. I've got lots more species I want to include, but I'm just waiting until I've finished the creation of the wildlife pond and the wildflower meadow, and those areas are sown before I then plant the bulbs in that I have left over. As I've just mentioned, I'm also going to be creating a new wildlife pond that I'm already part way through digging, and I'm going to be adding an oak deck and an oak pergola over the top of the deck adjacent to the pond as a little seating area, so really looking to getting that established. I'm also going to be putting in some dry stone walls around the meadow for lots of invertebrates, and also hopefully to attract one of the butterfly species I would really love to get in this garden that I had at my last property in Essex, which is the wall brown, which, as the name suggests, it loves basking on stone walls. So I want to put in a big curving dry stone wall in the meadow area, which will hopefully provide more habitat as well for things like common lizards that I would love to see in this garden, and frogs, toads and newts as well, if I can create plenty of crevices in between the stonework. And then finally, I really want to create a stumpery in this garden as well, a bit of a woodland walk. So with some of the mounds of turf that I've stripped off the meadow areas, I'm going to be creating more banking and more mounds through the shady woodland areas, and then creating a bit of a stumpery and planting all that up and creating a little shady walk through the edge of the woodland, which again I'm really looking forward to. So loads to come throughout the course of 2026. I really hope that you're going to stick with me on this journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single video I produce about the creation of this 1 acre oasis here at the Georgian Wildlife Garden. And if you've missed any of the previous videos, go to the homepage, go on the Georgian Wildlife Garden, and you can catch up on all the videos that I've already made of this little 1 acre plot. And thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed today's video. I hope you've enjoyed taking this journey throughout the course of the last 8 months with me to see just what has turned up by simply letting nature take over and a little bit of intervention from me. And hopefully you will enjoy the rest of this journey with me throughout the course of the next few months and indeed years. And finally, a very happy new year to you all. Thanks so much for watching. Stay wild, stay tuned. I'll see you all very soon.